I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's February 25th, and we have a lot to talk about. Choosing a mobility device can be challenging. First, because it forces you to acknowledge that you need one. And that's not automatic. It isn't something that's easy for everyone to acknowledge. But as you'll hear from my guest, that mobility device can be liberating. It can empower you to go back to doing the things that have been difficult or even dangerous for a while. That mobility device can take you back to places that you can't otherwise get to. Mobility devices can be life-changing. But with so many to choose from, how do you know which mobility device is the right one for you? Joining me today to talk about how to choose the right mobility device is Dr. Evan Cohen. Dr. Cohen is an associate professor of physical therapy at Arcadia University in Pennsylvania, where his research focuses on gait, walking, and balance challenges in people with MS. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Cohen, there are a few other things that you should know about. The gut microbiome is made up of trillions of bacteria and microorganisms that live in the intestinal tract. And a connection between the gut microbiome and our immune system has made the gut microbiome a target for MS research. Now, a research team at Yale School of Medicine has identified gut bacteria at significantly higher levels in people with MS. The researchers also discovered that compared to people who don't have MS, people with MS have a smaller number of a particular bacteria that's coated in an antibody that's necessary to help our systems remove specific groups of bacteria in our gut. In this study, the researchers recruited 43 people who had been newly diagnosed with MS and who hadn't yet started a disease-modifying therapy. They also recruited 42 healthy people to serve as controls in the study. All of the study participants provided stool samples from which bacteria were isolated, and the researchers found that the study participants who had been newly diagnosed with MS had a significantly smaller proportion of gut bacteria that contained a particular antibody. And this bacteria with this antibody was responsible for removing specific groups of bacteria out of our system. Of the 43 people in the study who had been newly diagnosed with MS, 19 provided an additional stool sample 6 months after starting a B-cell depleting disease-modifying therapy. And the researchers noted that the gut microbiome of these study participants more closely resembled the gut microbiome of the healthy control group than they had before starting their DMT. Now, there's a lot more work ahead in understanding the connection between the gut microbiome and the central nervous system. But one day, scientists may be able to identify patterns of microbes in the gut that could serve as biomarkers for someone who is more likely to develop MS. And proactively treating that individual with the right disease-modifying therapy could mean that they never develop MS. Now, if you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. While we're talking about the connection between the gut microbiome and our central nervous system, it seems like ideal timing to share the outcome of a study that has identified how that connection actually works. A research team at UCLA has provided direct evidence showing that the gut microbiome communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve, which is actually 2 nerves that run down each side of your body from your brain to your large intestine, carrying signals between the brain, heart, and your digestive system. In this study, the researchers observed that lab mice raised without any gut bacteria, these are known as germ-free mice, well, they showed significantly lower activity in their vagus nerve compared to mice with a normal gut microbiome. And when these germ-free mice were introduced to gut bacteria from normal mice, their vagus nerve activity increased to normal levels. In additional experiments, the research team introduced antibiotics into the small intestines of normal mice, which led to a decrease in vagus nerve activity. In the germ-free mice, antibiotics had no impact on vagus nerve activity. But when the antibiotics were washed out and replaced with intestinal fluids from normal mice, the vagus nerve activity was restored. This did not occur when fluids from the germ-free mice were introduced. This study also identified specific substances or metabolites produced by the gut microbiome that could stimulate vagus nerve activity. These metabolites activated different groups of cells in the vagus nerve, and this activation extended to nerve cells in the brainstem, demonstrating a clear pathway for gut-brain communication. Scientists have long theorized that the vagus nerve has facilitated communication between the gut microbiome and the brain, but there hasn't been much direct evidence to support this hypothesis. This study provides that direct evidence, which should help in the development of future treatments for MS and other neurological conditions. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. As artificial intelligence continues to find its way into MS care, it's not unreasonable for patients to wonder how the quality of AI care compares to the care that they receive from their neurologist. And a research team in Turkey has provided some insight into that question. The researchers developed 20 multiple-choice questions that focused on key aspects of MS treatment, including diagnostic criteria, treatment options, and the management of complications. The difficulty of the questions was similar to questions found on neurology board exams. These questions were submitted to 37 neurology specialists and 79 neurology residents in Turkey. Then the same questions were submitted to well-known AI platforms, including ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity. On average, the neurology specialists answered about 12 of the 20 questions correctly. The neurology residents answered an average of 9 questions correctly, and neurology residents who had received more than 2 years of training answered an average just short of 12 questions correctly, quite similar to the neurology specialists. Taken together, the AI platforms answered 17 questions correctly, with the Claude platform scoring the highest, answering 19 out of 20 questions correctly. Please keep in mind that this study was only conducted among neurologists and neurology residents in Turkey, so while the outcome is interesting, these results don't necessarily reflect the quality of MS care in any other country. For now, artificial intelligence should be viewed as a complement to a neurologist's care and certainly not as an alternative. But it's somewhat reassuring to know that the most well-known AI platforms can hold their own when it comes to taking the equivalent of a pop quiz on MS care. Now, if you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find that link in today's show notes. One of the fundamental ways that people with multiple sclerosis can participate in research is by sharing the knowledge they've gained from living with MS. Patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMS, because, after all, who doesn't love another acronym? PROMS improve and enrich MS research. The global PROMS Initiative was launched in 2019, and its mission is to reach consensus on a set of standardized patient-reported outcomes that can be used in the development of new therapies as well as in the clinic. The initiative is jointly led by the MS International Federation and the European Charcot Foundation, with the Italian MS Society acting as the lead agency. And now the Global PROMS Initiative is conducting a survey to gain insights from people with MS on their tech literacy and their experience using digital tools to monitor their MS symptoms. The online survey is completely anonymous and will take about 30 minutes to complete. Survey results will be used to provide recommendations to researchers and companies developing digital technology for people with MS. So consider this your opportunity to help shape the future. If you're ready to donate 30 minutes of your time to advance MS research, you'll find a link to the survey in today's show notes. Simply put, MS can limit your ability to get around and do the things you like to do. And when that happens, a mobility device can make a big difference in staying safe, staying active, and improving your quality of life. In a moment, Dr. Evan Cohen joins me to discuss how to know when it's time to consider a mobility device and how to choose the right mobility device for you. Multiple sclerosis can impact your mobility, and adjusting to that change can be difficult. Using a mobility device can make a huge difference in staying safe, staying active, and improving your overall quality of life. Dr. Evan Cohen joins me today to discuss the benefits of using a mobility device and to share some tips for finding the mobility device that's right for you. Dr. Cohen is an associate professor of physical therapy at Arcadia University in Pennsylvania, where his research focuses on gait, walking, and balance challenges in people with MS. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Cohen.
Thanks for having me, John.
So, how does someone know when it's time to start using a mobility device?
There are two perspectives here. One is that of the person with MS, and the other is mine as a physical therapist who specializes in working with those folks. I think from the person's perspective, if there's a problem with mobility that is impactful, physically or otherwise, then it's time to think about using a mobility device. On one hand, a person may feel unsteady and unconfident when they're standing and walking, and maybe for that person, a mobility device might be helpful. On the other hand, if a person has had a fall or a near fall or multiple falls, then using an appropriate mobility device can help to minimize that risk and prevent additional injury. As a PT, I would be looking at several things in making the decision, but they really boil down to a person's balance and ability to walk, their safety and their confidence, and their ability to navigate all of the environments in which they regularly come in contact. And my goal when recommending a device, when the use of a device, is to find that balance between reducing the risk of injury, reducing the risk that somebody would have a fall, and something that improves their mobility, that enables them to walk further, faster, or better access the environment in the way that they want.
Why is it a good idea to involve a rehabilitation therapist to help determine which mobility device is going to be right for an individual?
Well, a rehab therapist has the knowledge and skills to make a determination about which device would be best. Worked with many people who've come by a mobility device in some other way. They borrowed it from a family member, or they bought one from a local pharmacy, and it may be useful, and they may have ended up picking the right device, but there isn't that same kind of comprehensive recommendation that a rehabilitation therapist can provide based on the person's ability to use their body and how a device might work best to help them achieve their goals. My recommendation is that a person looking to make this decision should always see a PT to make sure they get this comprehensive view and really support the right decision.
What are some of the more common mobility devices that are available for people with MS?
So I think we can break this down into two categories. There's the category of devices that help someone to walk, hopefully better, more safely. And then there are wheeled mobility devices. If we're thinking about the walking assisted devices, there are several different kinds of canes. I'm in the US. If you're in the UK, you would call it a walking stick. But there are canes that have a single point, canes that have 3 or 4 points on the bottom that are spread out more to give a bit more stability, different kinds of crutches. I think most people, when they think about a crutch, they think about what I would call an axillary crutch, the kind that goes up underneath your armpit. But I don't use that or recommend that often for people with MS. More often, I might recommend a forearm crutch. That's the one that's got a single handle and then a cuff that wraps around the forearm, also called Lofstrand or Canadian crutches, depending on where you are. I've prescribed trekking poles for many people, like a hiking stick, taller than a regular cane, but may give some of the same stability. And then there are things like walkers or rollators, some with wheels, some without, some with lots of bells and whistles, depending on what you need. For wheeled mobility, it can be a simple manual wheelchair all the way up through some kind of motorized scooter or even a highly customized motorized wheelchair.
At first glance, it seems like a cane or walking stick, a walker, or a rollator are all designed to help someone walk. Are there functional differences or operational differences between these devices that could determine which one would be best for someone?
Certainly. The parameters that I'm thinking about, the one that is probably most critical is, does it help? does it make this person's walking better, safer, enable them to walk greater distances? Does it do the job that it needs to do? And then it comes down to finding the best fit. And there, not only is the size important, but for example, there are many different kinds of hand grips on cane. So just what we think of as a simple single point cane, there are a variety of different grips, materials, shapes that may be easier or more difficult for somebody to negotiate, or even just a matter of preference. I prefer the smoothness of plastic over the squishiness of foam. So there's both the personal element of finding something that feels comfortable to use, and then the to me practical element of, does it do its job? And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the person's feeling about the device. For some people, doesn't matter. It's okay if it's metal and shiny silver. That's okay. Some people want something that's a little more cosmetically appealing, and there are lots of options for that. Lots of different finishes on assistive devices. John, we hadn't talked about this before, but I conducted a research study a few years ago where we had a bunch of people with MS come in, and over time we gave them different assistive devices to see how it changed their walking. And we also asked them, how do they feel about each of these devices? And after the study was done, I interviewed the people to ask them about it. And the trekking poles, because we used trekking poles as one of the devices in the study. And those were donated by a company that was kind enough to give them to us. And they were metallic red. They were pretty bright. And it was very interesting to hear when in talking with the people after the study was done about which did they prefer, and did it change their mind about using an assistive device? And for a few of them, when I asked them about the trekking pole, there was this very broad spectrum of responses from, I thought it made me look cool because it looks like a piece of sporting gear. And then on the other end of the spectrum was, it was so bright red, I felt like it was a strobe light going off, drawing attention to me, and I didn't like it. So that was the same exact device in the hands and minds of two different people. So I think there's definitely an element there too that, and that it all goes into the decision, right? Because I can give someone a device that I think is perfect. It helps them be safe. They know how to use it. It's sized properly. But if they hate it and they never use it, then what's the point? So making sure, and again, to me, it's about finding concordance between my clinical decision making about it and the person's interest and willingness to use the device. Because if we can't come to an agreement, then I might as well not make a recommendation in the first place.
This is a big issue, and it's one that I've witnessed firsthand, where someone just doesn't want to give in to MS and use a mobility device. I've seen someone hesitate because they feel that using a mobility device will make them look old, frail, or it will simply announce to the world that they have a disability. And as a result of that attitude, quite frankly, I've seen that same person experience more falls than they should have. So what's the best way for overcoming that mindset and keeping that person safe?
It is a highly challenging issue for people to deal with. because there's the physical element, but then there's the psychosocial element. This feeling that by making that change, you're crossing this important threshold. That it's you're giving into the decline. But my perspective is that using a device can really enable a person to either continue or get back to participating in the things that they value in life. A mobility device isn't a cure-all, but can really help someone stay steadier, enable them to walk farther and faster than before, reduce the amount of energy expended during walking, which might limit their fatigue and others. Certainly, again, as a physical therapist, one of my biggest concerns is that someone has an injurious fall. And if using that device can prevent one fall, well, then it is worth it. The transition to wheeled mobility has a similar and maybe more pronounced stigma, but for many people, it frees them to do the things that they had to stop doing before. I have an anecdote to share, if you'll let me. There was a gentleman I worked with some years ago who was quite disabled from his MS, and he got to a point where he was homebound in a big city, like where he could access the outside, and he grumpily just didn't want to do it. And he and I had a real heart to heart one day, and I said, "It would let you get back outside," and he grimaced at me a little bit. And later that session, we were talking about this new movie that was coming out. And he said, "Oh, I was a big fan of the writer of the books, and I can't, but now I have to wait until it comes on cable." And I said, "I'll tell you what, if we can proceed and get you this real mobility, I'll take you to the movies." And he gave me this, slant-eyed look. And there was something about that convinced him. Like he realized how much he missed going to the movies, going to the movie theater. This is long before Netflix, where you could get, or whatever, Prime Video, you could get it on your screen. And we did. A couple of weeks later, we had the idea for what kind of chair he needed. We were able to get him sized up and have the chair delivered, and went to the movies. And we got back home, and he gave me this begrudging, "Yeah, you were right. Thank you for that." But there was something about, like, he finally made the connection that there was a part of his life that he was no longer able to fulfill. And getting this device opens that door again and enabled him to get back out to the community.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between a wheelchair, a motorized scooter, and a power chair, and how someone should determine which is going to be right for them?
Sure. As far as that determination, that's a decision that really needs to be made in conjunction with the appropriate healthcare professionals, which it may include a PT, it may include an occupational therapist. Both PTs and occupational therapists do wheelchair seating and positioning. There's also a specialist on the equipment side who does that kind of work too. As far as what they are, a wheelchair. When I think about a wheelchair, it's a manual device. I'm sure many people have seen it. Typically, it's a seat with two big wheels on the back that you can grab and propel with your hands, two smaller wheels in the front. Again, depending on how it's put together, some people are able to use their feet to push a chair around, or both arms and legs, and that's fine. A motorized scooter and a powered wheelchair have a lot of similarities. They both have battery-powered motors to move people around. The scooters generally have a handlebar for steering, like something that you have to reach out and grab a hold of and turn, like a bicycle. While a powered wheelchair usually uses the most common control is a joystick mounted on one side of the chair or the other. But there are other control modules. Some people may not have the dexterity to work a joystick. There are many alternatives there that can enable someone to control that chair, even if they don't have the strength or control in the hand. One critical difference to me is that the seating on a scooter is typically generic. It's a seat. It's not necessarily terribly supportive. For some people, they have to step onto the scooter, and it may be a bit more difficult to navigate. Where the seating and positioning on a power wheelchair can be highly customized depending on the person's needs, including a seating and positioning device that helps protect the skin and maintain good posture, that may include motorized repositioning to help the person readjust in the chair and to protect their skin. There's also an in-between called power assist propulsion, where it uses the frame of a manual wheelchair, but the wheels have a built-in motorized component. So you would propel that chair with the hands, just like a traditional chair, but it has a mechanized propulsion assistance piece that once you push and propel, it gives a little extra boost. And so this is great for someone who doesn't need the complexity of a power wheelchair, but it makes it easier to get around. It requires less energy because you don't have to push and push and push. It can give you some support. It's particularly useful if someone has to negotiate like an incline where it's going to take a lot more power. The chair can kick in and support there also.
My wife lived with MS, and I saw her transition from using a rollator to a wheelchair. And as an observer, I thought that transition occurred later than it should have. What are the signs that a mobility device is no longer meeting someone's needs?
I think as we talked about a bit already, the purpose of the assistive device is to enable this person to do the things that they want and need to do. And so if I have a patient come and see me and they're not able to get in and out of the bathroom, to manage in the kitchen, get out to the community, we're going to try to find a device that is going to help that person do that. And hopefully it frees them to do it. And if there's a decline, which we know may happen in people with MS, maybe that device is no longer meeting the need. I think it's not uncommon. If we go back to the devices for walking, it's not uncommon that I'll see someone with MS will make a decision that using something like a single point cane is a good decision for them. They are safe. It helps to improve their mobility. That's wonderful. And maybe a period of time goes by, weeks, months, years, and I may see that person again, and they're just a little more unsteady. The cane just isn't doing what it did before. And coming back to the prescription, part of what I'm looking at is, how does this device improve your balance and walking? I'm going to test you without it and test you with it so we can see, oh, you're more steady with this device. You can walk further with this device. If it gets to the point where it's not doing that job anymore, then maybe we need to revisit. And that transition from walking mobility to wheeled mobility, that it's a challenging one. And for some people, they may be bridging it for a bit. For some people, they may still be able to navigate in their home, but they just don't have the ability to navigate in the community anymore. And so some of that transition might happen. The key for decision making for me is safety first, and then like autonomy and quality of life. So if there's a safety issue, then I'm worried about this person falling and injuring themselves and making the situation worse. So that's issue number one. And then issue number two is the autonomy. How is changing to wheeled mobility from walking mobility? What is that going to do to enable the person to get back to the things that they need and want to do?
Does insurance cover mobility devices? And are there other resources that can help people get what they need when cost is an issue?
That's a tough question to answer because every insurance plan has a different set of rules. So I think the best answer I can give is some insurance companies cover some portion of some mobility devices, which I recognize is kind of a terrible answer. My best understanding in the U.S., Medicare Part B, which is they have probably the most common set of rules. They cover 80% of the cost of most walkers, canes, and crutches that are deemed medically necessary after the Part B deductible is satisfied. The basics of the regulation are the same for wheelchairs, manual and powered wheelchairs, but those are much more challenging to get those kinds of approvals for. They're substantially more expensive and are also, for the most part, quite individualized. Even a manual wheelchair requires a bit more effort to get a correct fit than something like a cane that we can just adjust the height on. So, but with an appropriate team involved, with the appropriate letter of medical necessity that describes what is needed and why, hopefully people's insurance will cover at least the largest part of it. As far as other resources, again, here in the U.S., there aren't any easily accessible resources that would make up the difference. My first recommendation for people is to reach out to the navigators at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society to see what kind of resources they might have locally or nationally. There are some other, patient support organizations that may be able to provide some kind of funding like that. Otherwise, the funding is unfortunately a bit more limited than it should be, in my opinion.
Dr. Evan Cohen, I want to thank you for all you do to improve the lives of people who are living with MS. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thanks. It was a pleasure to speak with you, John.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/391. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes. And it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.